In this video I'm going to show you exactly how to take your drone footage from looking mediocre to being professional and cinematic. Hi, my name's Rick. If you're new to the channel, I'm a photographer and filmmaker from the northwest of the UK, and I make videos about how to use your camera to create better videos and take better photographs as well. Now, I'm here this evening with my Mavic Pro 2 on what is a glorious evening. Thankfully, the wind's died down a bit now, and basically I want to go through three categories, each of which in turn will help you produce much better looking cinematic drone footage. Now, the first one is all about the settings within your drone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the studio, go through how and why I set up my drone in the way that I do.
So when it comes to setting up your drone, the first thing you want to look at is the camera settings, and these are different depending on what drone you actually have. Now, the things you want to pay attention to are the aperture. You want to find the sharpest aperture for your particular drone. Some apertures, like the Mini 3 Pro, the new one, they're set. That's a set aperture, so you can't change that anyway. But some, like the Mavic 2 Pro that I've got, you can change the aperture, and the sharpest aperture for that is somewhere between f2.8 and f5.6. You generally don't want to be going outside that sharpest aperture. Then it comes to the shutter speed, and there's something I'm sure you're probably aware of, that is the 180 degree shutter rule. And basically that rule states that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So if you're filming at 24 or 25 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set on this to 1/50, a 50th of a second. And that is to make sure that you get the right level of motion blur in your footage and your footage doesn't look too jerky. Now, when I was testing the Mini 3 a few weeks ago, I shot a lot of stuff at very high shutter speeds, sometimes going up to 1,000th or a 2,000th of a second. And I'll show you that footage now. To be honest, it's still incredible looking footage. So depending on what you're filming, you might not need to worry about this too much. If you are filming a fast moving subject like a car or a runner or moving water or the sea, then you will notice that your footage doesn't look as smooth if you are using a faster shutter speed. The other thing you should probably concentrate on is the ISO, and keeping the ISO down as low as possible, down to 100 if you can, and that goes for pretty much all DJI drones, and I'm sure other drones as well. So the thing that you want to do to make sure that you can maintain all these settings to get the best footage is probably invest in some ND filters, and I've linked the ones that I use down below. The next thing to touch on is picture profiles. I generally set it to log because you're getting the most information out of the sensor, and that goes for the drones with 10-bit sensors. If you've got an 8-bit sensor in your drone, then you should probably pick the best profile it suits, because manipulating log with an 8-bit sensor when you come to doing your color grading, it's just quite hard to work with. So yeah, if you've got a 10-bit sensor, use log. Then we come on to the actual movement itself, and this is key to getting that pro looking cinematic footage. Now, the Mavic 2 has something called tripod mode, which you access on the side of here. It's just a little T, and that slows down the speed that the drone moves and reduces the sensitivity as well. And for work where you're quite close to the subject and you're moving around it, this can work really well. But if you're filming big, vast scenes or fast moving subjects, this just isn't going to work for you at all. The drone doesn't move quick enough for you to react to what's going on. I generally don't use tripod mode very much at all. It's good for doing stuff like flying through trees, but other than that, I tend to leave it alone. So the things you can change on here to help with your movement and smooth it all out. The first thing is the gimbal speed and the sensitivity, and you can easily access these through the menus on most DJI drones. So what you want to do is reduce the gimbal speed, and this is the speed the camera moves up and down on the gimbal. So reduce the gimbal speed. I set mine to about 15 and up the gimbal smoothness. This is how slowly the camera comes to a stop at the end of the move. So I tend to set my gimbal smoothness to about 22. And with these settings, I'm the ones I'm going to go on to play around with them and see what works best for you. The next ones to mention are the throttle and the left and right movements and the forward and backward movements. So the throttle, I've set mine to 0.25 as I go up and down quite a bit in some of my movements, but 0.4, the default setting, is probably fine. The next one is the rotation left and right, otherwise known as yaw, and I've slowed this down to 0.2, and I sometimes have it set that little bit slower as well, just so that my left and right turning is a lot smoother. And finally, there is the forward, backward, left and right, and that's sort of strafing left and right rather than turning left and right. And I've reduced this a bit, not as much as the yaw, but I have reduced it a bit just to get a bit more smoothness in those movements. So you might want to have a play around with these and see what you prefer. If you bring them right down, you're going to head more towards what it's like in tripod mode. Finally, there's something called yaw point sensitivity, and I believe that is how fast your rotation is. And I've brought this down to 50, as you can see here. So that's how I've set this up. Again, work out what works best for you. And really in this situation, there's just no substitution for practice. Just get out there and practice different moves on your drone. Let's get back outside.
So the second thing I want to talk about is what actually makes a good shot. You don't just want to take your drone up and take a shot and show that just for the sake of it, just because you've got a drone, because that isn't interesting, that isn't going to engage the viewer. You need to think about what progresses the story that you're trying to tell and what kind of a shot is most engaging to the viewer. And from that, you need to think about what motivates your shot. And when I talk about motivation in shots, it's what is it in the scene that is making you shoot it. So that could be a character, it could be someone running, it could be someone cycling, it could be someone shooting some epic photos or something like that, or it could be a car driving down the road, it could be a boat sailing through the sea or a canoeist going downstream. Some sort of character that you are filming with your drone that you wouldn't be able to do with a normal camera. That is a great example of motivation. In what I do, another great example could be the landscape itself. But it's got to be a landscape that's interesting to the viewer. Much like a landscape photo, showing the landscape in conditions that the majority of people wouldn't normally see. So whether that be an epic sunrise or sunset or misty conditions or something like that. It's showing something a bit different to the norm. That's what's going to make your shots exciting. That's going to make people want to watch more of your videos. You think about whenever drones or aerial footage has been used in cinema or documentary, there is always a subject, there is always something motivating that shot. If you think of stuff like Planet Earth and cheetahs chasing its prey through the grasslands, something like that, there is always some reason for that shot. It isn't just to show something for the sake of showing it. So like a shot like this, yes, it might set the scene, but you could make that so much more interesting, and that's what I'm going to get on to with my third point. How do you make this more interesting? The final thing to mention in this bit about thinking about what you shoot is just think less is more. There's a real tendency to overuse drone footage because it's exciting, but it is something that gets boring quite quickly. And the people that use drone footage the best are those that sprinkle it throughout their footage sparingly. It lifts the production to another level, but it is really quite easy to overdo. So just try and avoid that completely. Actually, one more thing while I'm on this section is hold your shots for longer than you think you're going to have to hold them. Add on another 5 or 10 seconds to the shots.
Something else as well, and this is probably more of an editing thing than a drone thing necessarily, but it definitely applies here. And it is when you are showing shots, you don't want to show them for very long at all. So many times I see people showing drone shots for 10, 20, 30, sometimes even longer amounts of time than that. It's just unnecessary, and that goes for other bits of B-roll as well. Unless you are filming a specific subject, doing a specific thing that takes longer than that, you shouldn't be showing any clips for that length of time. Less is generally more when it comes to this.
The final thing I want to talk about is movement in the video, and this is where your drone footage comes to life. This to me is the most exciting bit because you have got so much control over the movement of your drone, and that's what sets drone footage apart from everything else. It's the amount of movement you can get into your shots. Now this is where the first element really plays in, because you need to be able to have those fine controls of the drone to be able to get smooth cinematic movement. Anything jerky will just put the audience off. You need the smooth footage, and it also needs to be the right tempo as well. If you fly around too fast, that's just going to be a bit jarring, and it's just not going to look quite as nice as if you take things at a slightly slower pace. Not too slow though. You don't want a 20-second drone clip that's going to bore the audience. Also, when you're using movements in your drone, when you come to edit, be careful to cut and at the start and at the end of the clip, after the movement has started and before the movement ends, just so that there's no kind of jarring sticking point at the beginning or end of your clip. Now we come to the actual movements. Okay, so in my mind there are 5 levels of complexity of movement. The first one is a single axis movement. This is a movement that is forwards or backwards or sideways or panning or up or down. Pretty simple to do, it is just one control. Then we go on to a 2-axis movement. So this is going forwards whilst you take the drone up, or going forwards whilst you turn the drone, or going forwards while you point the camera up or down. And this can be used in shots like reveals. This is really good to do something like a reveal of a cityscape if you're flying over water and you just show the water and then you reveal up to show the cityscape. And you can also use it in landscapes as well. It's a really simple technique. You just need to make sure that you have got the movement of that camera control right, because it is really easy to pull a little bit too far on that dial. Then we go up to a 3-axis movement. So this is kind of going forwards or backwards whilst going up and down whilst moving the camera. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? The more complicated the move gets, obviously the harder it is, because you've got to think about more things, but the more dynamic you can make your shots. A good 3-axis movement would be a sort of a strafe from left to right whilst turning, so you get kind of a parallax effect on your subject whilst moving up, so you kind of reveal more of the area as well. Then we go to a 4-axis movement, which is kind of the same, but you bring a bit of camera movement up or down into it as well, and it just creates so much more of a dynamic shot. And then we move up to level 5, which is the trickiest bit. It is basically doing the previous one whilst going forwards or backwards, and you can bring in these epic sweeping movements, but they're very difficult to do. But when you do them right, they look absolutely incredible. This is going to sound ridiculous. I think one of the things that has made me better at doing these movements is playing video games. The controls of a drone are so similar to controlling a helicopter on Grand Theft Auto, and I think from playing that a lot in my 20s, I've probably retained a little bit of the muscle memory, because I so much prefer doing moves with my drone like that than using the modes that the drone has built into it, those sort of active track modes to circle around your subject or to follow your subject. When you have autonomy over the drone, you can get so many more dynamic moves. The only thing is, which you may have seen from the footage I've shown you in this, if you are filming yourself, it becomes pretty tricky, because no matter how you do it, whether you use the automatic modes or whether you do it yourself, you're always going to have a controller in your hands. The good thing about the automatic modes is, although you've got a controller in your hands, you can put it behind your back, you can hide it in some way, you can look around and look like you're interacting with the landscape. If you are doing it yourself, your face is in a screen, and that doesn't look great. Now, I'm currently looking into a way around this, and I'm hoping to explore this in a later video. So if you are interested in that, please subscribe to my channel. And if you've liked this video, if you found it useful, I would really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up and comment below. Let me know any other drone flying tips that you have. And yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, I'd just love to hear from you as well. It's great that I'm getting more viewers on this channel, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you ever so much for watching.